My parents handed my $10 million inheritance to my sister and dragged me out of the house like I was nothing. But they didn't expect what came next. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I never thought the day would come when my own family would treat me like a stranger in my own home. My name is Maddie Carter, and I'm 32 years old. I've spent most of my life working hard, building a career as an architect, and doing my best to support my family whenever they needed me. My parents, Richard and Evelyn, always had a clear favorite, my younger sister Brooke. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. For years, I stayed out of their way, quietly helping with bills, organizing paperwork, and even taking care of little things my parents never bothered to handle themselves. I wasn't asking for recognition. I just wanted fairness. When my father suddenly fell ill, I expected that after everything I had done, my parents would acknowledge my efforts when it came to the inheritance. I believed my loyalty and hard work would mean something. But I was wrong. The day they called me into the living room, I thought it would be a private family conversation. Instead, it felt like a trial. They sat there, smiling, and told me that Brooke would inherit everything. Every single dollar. $10 million gone to her. I couldn't understand it. All those years of helping, all the sacrifices, all the work I put in for the family, ignored. Before I could even speak, they told me to leave. I was not only shocked but humiliated. Being pushed out of the house by the people who were supposed to love me was one of the most painful experiences of my life. I left with my head down, trying to hold back tears as I stepped out into the cold air, away from the home that I had thought was safe. Walking to my car, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How could they do this to me? How could they hand everything to Brooke without even talking to me properly? It wasn't just about the money. It was about respect, recognition, and the years I had devoted to supporting them. I knew that sitting at home and feeling sorry for myself would solve nothing. I had to find a way to take control of my life again, to show them that I was more than just the overlooked daughter. The betrayal was sharp, but it also lit a fire inside me. I couldn't let this break me. If anything, it made me more determined to prove that my worth was not defined by their approval. That day, as I drove away from the house, I silently made a promise to myself. I would not let Brooke's inheritance or my parents' favoritism define me. I would find a way to rise above this, to build my own success, and to reclaim the respect that was rightfully mine. It was the beginning of a journey I didn't ask for, but one I knew I had to take, and they would not see it coming. I couldn't believe my ears when my parents made the announcement. Brooke, my younger sister, was going to inherit the entire $10 million estate. Every expectation I had, every hope that my years of hard work and loyalty would be recognized, shattered in that single moment. I sat frozen, staring at them, unable to speak. It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. Richard and Evelyn didn't even try to hide their satisfaction. They looked at me with a coldness I had never seen before. There was no room for discussion, no attempt to explain why they had made this decision. I realized in that moment that I was not only ignored but completely dismissed. All the sacrifices I had made for the family, the late nights helping with bills, the careful management of paperwork, the countless times I put my own life on hold to support them, they didn't matter at all. Then it happened. My parents stood and told me to leave. Their tone wasn't angry, just firm, as if this was a normal, everyday decision. They walked me to the door without a single word of comfort or acknowledgement. I felt the weight of humiliation pressing down on me. I wanted to argue, to make them see what they were doing, but the words wouldn't come. I was trapped in shock, staring at the walls I had grown up in, now feeling more like a stranger than a daughter. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit me, but it did nothing to calm the storm of emotions inside. My chest ached from a mixture of grief, anger, and disbelief. I sank to the ground for a moment, unable to hold back the tears. I wept for what felt like hours, mourning not just the loss of money, but the loss of my parents' respect, love, and recognition. Every happy memory I had thought I shared with them now felt like a lie. I felt completely powerless. The people who had raised me, who were supposed to be my guides and protectors, had chosen my sister over me without hesitation. It wasn't just betrayal, it was rejection at the deepest level. I thought about every effort I had made, every time I had put family first, and it seemed like none of it had mattered. I had been loyal, careful, and responsible, and yet here I was standing alone, discarded like I was nothing. Through the tears, a quiet anger started to grow. The humiliation stung, but it also sparked something in me. I realized that letting this defeat me wouldn't help. I had to find a way forward, to take control of my life again. I wiped my tears and took a deep breath. This betrayal was crushing, yes, but it was also the push I needed to show them, and myself, that I was stronger than they could ever imagine. That day, outside the house, I began to understand that my life was no longer theirs to decide. I found myself in a small rented apartment, far from the house I had called home for so long. The space was modest, nothing like the life I had imagined for myself, but it was mine for now. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I let the silence sink in. For the first time, I had no one to answer to but myself. It was lonely, but also freeing in a way I hadn't expected. I thought about my parents, about how they had always put Brooke on a pedestal. Every choice they made, every word they praised, was for her. I realized that I had spent years expecting fairness from people who were incapable of it. They weren't evil, exactly, just blind to their own favoritism and easily swayed by Brooke's charm. The unfairness of it all was suffocating, but somewhere in that quiet, I understood that I could no longer rely on them. My life couldn't be dictated by their mistakes. For hours, I sat in the apartment, replaying every memory, every slight, every act of favoritism. The sadness and anger threatened to overwhelm me, but slowly, a resolve began to build. I refused to be broken by this. I refused to let their choices define my worth. I realized that my life wasn't over, and that I could turn this betrayal into strength. I could rise above the situation, not by pleading for fairness, but by creating my own path and taking control. That night, I called my closest friend, Ethan Parker. Ethan had been a constant in my life for years. He was a sharp lawyer, thoughtful and practical, and he understood me better than anyone. I told him everything: the inheritance, my parents' favoritism, Brooke's manipulation. He listened quietly, letting me vent all the frustration and hurt I had bottled up for years. When I finally finished, he spoke with a calm certainty that gave me hope. "You're not powerless, Maddie," he said. "This isn't about fighting or yelling. It's about strategy. You have every right to protect yourself and your future. But you need to be smart, measured, and methodical. That's how you win without letting them control you anymore." Hearing him say that felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time, I felt a plan forming in my mind. I wouldn't just survive this, I would come back stronger. I would prove that I didn't need their approval, that I was capable of creating my own success and protecting what was rightfully mine. By the end of the night, I felt a spark of determination I hadn't felt in years. I knew the journey ahead would be difficult, and I would face obstacles, but I also knew I wasn't alone. With Ethan's guidance and my own drive, I could turn this betrayal into a turning point. I went to sleep that night with a sense of purpose. Tomorrow, I would start rebuilding, not just my life, but my dignity, my confidence, and my future. This was the beginning of my comeback. I spent the next few days going through every document I could get my hands on regarding the inheritance. The legal papers, financial statements, and old letters from my parents' advisor were scattered across my small apartment. I had never paid much attention to these details before, trusting my parents to handle everything fairly. Now, with the inheritance snatched from me, I realized I had to understand exactly what had happened. As I read, pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. Brooke hadn't just been lucky or favored. She had actively manipulated the situation. She had played on my parents' emotions, twisting their fears and doubts to make herself look deserving. There were notes and messages I found that showed her subtly pressuring them, creating guilt trips and half-truths that made them question me and overvalue her. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could someone I called my sister do this? And how could my parents be blind to it? But that wasn't all. As I dug deeper, I discovered troubling signs of mismanagement by my parents' financial advisor. Documents revealed careless handling of funds, risky investments, and missing statements that shouldn't have been ignored. Brooke had noticed these mistakes and cleverly used them to her advantage. She painted herself as responsible and trustworthy while making me look distant and uninterested, even though I had been quietly managing things for years. Everything made sense now. Why my parents had been so easily persuaded to favor her, why the inheritance had gone entirely to her. The more I learned, the more my determination grew. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about exposing the truth, reclaiming my dignity, and showing that I was not the powerless daughter they believed me to be. I couldn't undo the past, but I could make sure the lies and manipulation were revealed. The betrayal had hurt me deeply, but it also gave me a clear purpose. I wasn't going to fight blindly or emotionally. I would be precise, careful, and calculated. I made a list of all the evidence I had gathered so far: copies of letters, financial records, notes on Brooks' manipulations, and discrepancies in the advisor's files. Each piece of proof made me feel more in control. I realized that knowledge was my weapon. I could use the truth to protect myself, challenge the injustice, and hold those responsible accountable. By the end of that week, I had a plan forming in my mind. I would not only rebuild my life, but also make sure the unfairness that had hurt me was corrected in some way. The anger and betrayal that had weighed me down were transforming into focus and strategy. I knew that if I approached this correctly, I could take back what was mine and expose the corruption and favoritism that had cost me so much. For the first time since being kicked out, I felt a sense of control and clarity. I was ready to turn the tables. Once I had gathered all the evidence, I knew I had to organize it carefully. I started keeping detailed records of everything: financial statements, notes from conversations, and timelines of events that showed how Brooke had manipulated my parents and exploited their advisor's mistakes. Every piece of information was important. I created folders, spreadsheets, and even recorded some conversations where I could capture facts legally. It felt like building a puzzle, and for the first time, I felt like I had some control over a situation that had left me powerless. Next, I set up a meeting with Ethan, my trusted friend and lawyer. I laid everything out for him: the manipulations, the financial mismanagement, the documents I had collected. Ethan listened carefully, asking questions and pointing out options I hadn't considered. He explained how I could approach this strategically, without confrontation or rash moves that might backfire. For the first time, I could see a path forward that didn't rely on hoping my parents would change their minds or Brooke would admit anything. With his guidance, I began to feel a mix of hope and determination. At the same time, I realized I needed to prove to myself, and to everyone who had doubted me, that I didn't need my parents' money to succeed. I began laying the groundwork for my own architectural firm. I reached out to former clients, contacted suppliers, and drafted a business plan that was both practical and ambitious. The thought of building something of my own, entirely independent, filled me with a sense of empowerment. I wanted to show that success could be mine on my own terms. It wasn't easy. The anger I felt toward my family and the betrayal I had endured often bubbled to the surface. Some nights I found myself pacing my apartment, clenching my fists, replaying the unfairness over and over. But I learned to channel that anger into action. Every document I filed, every phone call I made, and every step I took toward starting my firm was a way to turn my pain into power. Instead of letting the betrayal break me, I was using it to fuel my determination. By the end of that month, I had made significant progress. My evidence was organized, my legal strategy was forming with Ethan's help, and my firm was ready to launch. Each day, I felt stronger, more capable, and more focused on my goals. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also awakened a drive in me that I hadn't known I had. I was no longer a victim of circumstances or favoritism. I was taking control of my life, building my future, and preparing to face whatever came next with clarity and strength. By the time I was ready to take the next step, I knew I had to be careful. Confronting Brooke directly would only give her the chance to twist the situation or dismiss me. Instead, I decided to be subtle. I started planting small hints about her behavior in ways she wouldn't immediately notice. I would casually mention certain facts in conversations with people who knew the family's finances, letting them see inconsistencies and gaps without directly accusing her. The goal was to make the truth quietly surface without giving her the chance to cover her tracks. I also decided to involve the family lawyer carefully. I didn't overwhelm them with accusations, but I shared select, verifiable pieces of evidence, documents and facts that couldn't be denied. I framed them in a way that raised questions about Brooke's conduct rather than attacking her outright. The lawyer started asking questions, showing concern and reviewing the details more closely. It felt good to see the wheels starting to turn, knowing that Brooke's manipulations were finally coming under scrutiny. At the same time, I quietly reached out to distant relatives who had long noticed my parents' favoritism and Brooke's behavior, but had stayed silent. I shared some of the facts with them, again carefully, so they could understand the situation without feeling like they were being dragged into a conflict. Many of them were shocked but supportive, expressing relief that someone was finally standing up. Their quiet backing gave me a sense of strength I hadn't expected. I realized that I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. Brooke, of course, didn't see any of this coming. At first, she seemed confident, believing that her charm and her parents' approval would shield her. But subtle cracks began to appear. I noticed small changes in her behavior. The way she hesitated in certain conversations, the way she asked more questions to the lawyer, the slight tension when distant relatives were around. She was starting to feel a threat she didn't understand yet. Even though she was beginning to sense something was off, she underestimated me. She assumed I would react emotionally, or that I wouldn't have the patience to plan carefully. That was her mistake. While she thought she was in control, I was quietly building a position that would give me leverage when the time was right. Every small step I took, every fact I revealed strategically, and every ally I gained brought me closer to reclaiming what had been taken from me. By the end of this phase, I felt a mix of anticipation and quiet satisfaction. The game had shifted. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was setting the stage for the moment when the truth would be undeniable. Brooke's confidence was faltering, even if she didn't realize it yet, and I could feel that the power balance was beginning to tilt in my favor. For the first time, I sensed that the tables were about to turn. As I continued digging deeper, I uncovered things that shocked me. Brooke hadn't just manipulated emotions or exploited my parents' trust. She had gone further. There were signatures on financial documents that didn't match my parents', and accounts that were hidden from them entirely. She had created the appearance of innocence while secretly moving money and assets into places only she could access. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Brooke had gone to great lengths to secure the inheritance for herself. I spent days documenting everything meticulously. Every forged signature, every hidden account, every suspicious transaction was carefully recorded. I made copies, organized files, and created timelines that showed exactly how she had manipulated the situation. It felt like building a case piece by piece. I knew that when the time came, the evidence had to be undeniable. I couldn't afford to leave room for doubt or for my parents to dismiss the facts out of hand. Finally, I decided it was time to confront my parents. I didn't do it out of anger or for money. My goal was simple: to show them the truth. I wanted them to see what had really been happening under their noses, and how they had been misled. I arranged a meeting with Richard and Evelyn, bringing my carefully documented evidence with me. I laid everything out calmly, step by step, showing how Brooke had forged signatures and hidden assets, and how her actions had directly influenced their decision to give her the inheritance. At first, my parents refused to believe me. They looked shocked, confused, and even defensive. Evelyn shook her head and said, "That can't be true. Brooke would never." Richard stared at the documents, trying to find a reason to dismiss them. I could see the disbelief in their eyes, the refusal to accept that their favorite child had betrayed them so completely. But the facts didn't lie. The signatures, the bank statements, the hidden accounts, everything was clear and verifiable. Slowly, I saw the change in their expressions. The initial denial faded, replaced by shock, then guilt, and finally a dawning realization. They had been blind to Brooke's manipulations, and now there was no escaping it. It was an emotional moment for all of us. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the truth was finally being seen, and sadness at how deeply my parents had been misled. For the first time in years, I saw them truly understand the consequences of their favoritism and trust. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't demand anything. I simply showed them the reality they had ignored, letting the facts speak for themselves. By the end of the meeting, my parents were shaken. They hadn't expected this, and they couldn't ignore it. I left that room knowing I had done what I came to do. I had revealed the truth. Brooke's deception was exposed, and my parents had no choice but to see the reality of what had happened. For me, it was not just about the inheritance anymore. It was about justice and clarity. The tables were turning, and for the first time, I felt the balance beginning to shift. After preparing carefully, I arranged a formal meeting with my parents, Brooke, and the family lawyer. I wanted everything out in the open, with no chance for misinterpretation. The atmosphere was tense from the start. Brooke walked in with her usual confidence, assuming she was untouchable, while my parents seemed uneasy, sensing that something serious was about to happen. I began by calmly presenting all the evidence I had gathered. I showed the forged signatures, the hidden accounts, and the manipulations Brooke had used to secure the inheritance. I explained, step by step, how she had taken advantage of their trust and exploited the financial mismanagement of their advisor. I watched as their expressions shifted from surprise to disbelief, and finally to the uncomfortable acknowledgement that the facts were undeniable. Then I turned the focus to myself, not to boast, but to make them see that I was capable of standing on my own. I told them about the architectural firm I had built from the ground up, sharing recent projects, client testimonials, and the growing reputation I had earned. I wanted them to understand that my worth wasn't tied to their money or approval. I had created my own path, proving that I was independent and successful on my own. Brooke, of course, did not take this quietly. She started attacking me emotionally, questioning my decisions, belittling my efforts, and trying to twist the narrative to make herself appear victimized. But I didn't let her provoke me. I stayed calm and composed, speaking clearly and logically. Every point I made was supported by evidence, leaving her attempts to undermine me ineffective. I realized that reacting emotionally would only give her power, so I remained measured and focused on the facts. The lawyer took notes and asked questions, verifying the details I presented. My parents were visibly shaken. Richard's hands shook as he held the documents, and Evelyn's eyes were wide with disbelief. They finally had to confront the reality they had ignored for so long. Brooke's confident facade was cracking, and she looked around the room, searching for support that wasn't there. The distant relatives who had quietly backed me were absent from this meeting, but their support had given me the courage to remain steady. By the end of the meeting, the tension had reached its peak, but I had maintained control. I hadn't yelled, cried, or begged. I had simply presented the truth, my achievements, and the evidence of Brooke's manipulations. It was clear to everyone in that room that the situation had shifted. The balance of power was no longer in Brooke's favor, and my parents could no longer ignore what had happened. Walking out of that meeting, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The showdown had been intense, but I had stayed true to my plan. I had confronted the betrayal, exposed the truth, and shown that I was strong, independent, and capable. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly being seen and heard, not as a daughter they could overlook, but as a person who had earned respect through determination and evidence. The battle was far from over, but the first victory had been won. After the showdown, the truth settled in. My parents finally realized how badly they had been misled, and the weight of their mistake hit them hard. They looked regretful, but it was too late to undo what had already been set in motion. The decisions they had made, the favoritism they had shown, and the trust they had misplaced were exposed, and there was no going back. I could see the remorse in their eyes, but I no longer needed their approval to feel whole or valued. Brooke, on the other hand, began facing real consequences. The extended family, who had previously overlooked her actions, were now aware of her manipulations. Her reputation, carefully built on charm and deceit, started to crumble. Even the family lawyer, who had once treated her with unquestioning trust, now approached her with caution, asking hard questions and reviewing her actions more critically. The careful web of lies she had spun could no longer hide in the light of the evidence I had gathered. She tried to defend herself, but the facts were undeniable, and everyone could see her for what she truly was. For me, this wasn't about revenge. I didn't need to see her punished to feel satisfied. My goal had always been to reclaim my dignity, my self-respect, and to show that I was capable of standing on my own. That mission had been accomplished. I had proven to myself and to everyone around me that I was more than the overlooked daughter, that my life, my career, and my achievements were mine and mine alone. The power I had gained wasn't about money or titles. It was about control over my own life. The emotional release I felt was overwhelming. For years, I had carried the pain of favoritism, betrayal, and humiliation. Now that weight had lifted. I could breathe freely without fear of being underestimated or ignored. I felt liberated, as if I had stepped out of a shadow that had followed me my whole life. The empowerment was real and tangible. I could feel it in the way I held myself, the confidence in my voice, and the calm certainty in my decisions. I took a quiet moment to reflect on everything: the struggle, the planning, the revelations, and the confrontation. It had been a long journey, but every step had been worth it. I had turned betrayal into strength, injustice into clarity, and pain into determination. I didn't need to rebuild my relationship with my parents or seek validation from Brooke. Standing tall on my own, I realized that true victory wasn't about defeating someone else. It was about reclaiming myself. I was finally free from the shadows of favoritism and deceit, and the future ahead felt bright, mine to shape however I chose. Looking back on everything, I realize how much this ordeal changed me. The betrayal cut deep, and the hurt felt unbearable at times, but it also forced me to grow in ways I never imagined. I learned to trust my own judgment, rely on my own strength, and fight for what I deserved without expecting anyone else to make it happen. Every painful moment became a lesson, every setback a push to be smarter and more determined. I found a sense of peace I hadn't known before. Building my life on my own terms became my focus. I devoted myself to my architectural firm, taking on new projects and clients who appreciated my work. Slowly, I created a life that reflected who I truly was: capable, independent, and resilient. The freedom to make my own decisions, to set my own priorities, and to build my own future was more valuable than any inheritance or approval I had lost. Surrounded by friends who had always believed in me, I felt genuine support and love. They celebrated my achievements with me, not because they had to, but because they cared. For the first time in a long time, I felt fully seen and appreciated for the person I was, not for what I could provide or how I had been treated by my family. The toxic influence of favoritism and betrayal was behind me, and I no longer carried the burden of trying to please people who didn't value me. I often think about my parents and Brooke, but without anger. I've accepted that their choices were theirs to make, and I can't change the past. What matters is what I did with the situation and how I took control of my life. That clarity brings me strength and confidence that I didn't have before. I am no longer defined by their mistakes or by their approval. I am defined by my actions, my resilience, and the life I have created for myself. Reflecting on it all, I can say it clearly. They thought taking my inheritance would destroy me. They gave me pain, but I turned it into power. Now, I am unstoppable. Those words aren't just a statement. They are the truth of who I am today. The betrayal that once hurt so deeply has become a source of strength, a reminder that I am capable of overcoming anything. I celebrate my success quietly, surrounded by people who matter, enjoying my accomplishments without fanfare or need for validation from anyone who once tried to diminish me. My life is mine, built on hard work, honesty, and determination. The past cannot touch me anymore. I am free, empowered, and unstoppable, and I finally feel the peace and satisfaction I deserve.